Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Sean.
And we're here with Veloci to tell you a little bit more about the differences between power washing and pressure washing.
So Mike, what is the difference between power washing and pressure washing?
I am glad you asked. One of the biggest differences is that power washing is with hot water. And by hot water, what we're saying is over 180 degrees. At Veloci, we have a variety of different products that cover both sides of power washing and pressure washing. Not everything on the pressure washing side can cover the power washing side, but pretty much anything on the power washing side can be used on a pressure washing application. So Sean, can you tell us a little bit more about the differences on a gun that is a power washing gun versus a pressure washing gun?
Yeah, absolutely. So here we have the SGS 35. This gun is rated for 320 degrees. So this is on the power washing side. It can also be used on the pressure washing side, as he mentioned. However, the gun that he has is rated for 140 degrees, so it can be used only on the pressure washing side and not on the power washing side.
And typically the commercial cleaners, you're never gonna see them use a gun like this. This has an empty cavity that just holds the valve in place versus something like this, which is Italian made, and it's got ribs inside the housing that keeps the gun separate from the inlet pipe, the outlet. It protects your hand ultimately when you're using hot water. So going from the gun into, let's say, before the gun. So how about hoses? When we've got hoses, this is just a typical residential hose. It's a PVC hose. It's only 140 degrees rated. And your hose, so in power washing and commercial grade cleaning, usually they'll give you like a spec range on hoses. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the differences are from the lay line versus what the actual ratings are for the hose?
Absolutely. So on this hose right here, this is going to be rated up to 310 degrees, but that's going to be for spike in temperature. The max operating temperature is going to be maxing out at 275 degrees.
And when you start to relate it to something like this, you know, there is some expansion and contraction. Anytime you're using hot water, it's typically very corrosive, even if it's just hot water and not even including the chemicals that you're running through it. These hoses cannot support that kind of stuff. And that's why they're also rated at lower PSIs. So this hose is only rated to 3000 PSI, which means that that's why it's going into a residential setting. You've got a low pressure gun and low temp gun. You've got a low temp and low pressure hose. So this whole setup is gonna go on something that you'd find at like a big box store versus the Cobra Jet hose and the MTM gun, which you're looking at 4000 plus PSI. And question for extra credit, do you know the burst rating on the hose?
3 times burst rating.
That's right. So when we talk about burst ratings, sometimes you're gonna see something like a 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, and it totally depends on the manufacturer of the hose. Cobra Jet hose is all 3 to 1. So if we rated this to 4000 PSI, it's not gonna burst till 12. And that's the same for the 6000 PSI, and that's gonna be your true commercial grade. So that thing's going up to 18,000 before you'd actually see a burst. And no, they don't actually burst. Typically what you're gonna see is a bulge or a pinhole leak. When we start looking at some of the other accessories here, so we've got some fittings, the foam cannon we'll touch on last, but let's actually talk about lances for a second. So if I'm using this lance and I'm pressure washing, you're probably gonna be fine, but there's not a whole lot to hold on to here. And so let's say I was gonna put this on this particular setup here, I would hold on to the grip portion like this when I'm cleaning. But there's a lot of circumstances where you just have a gun and then people will install we would just call it a pipe, the bare pipe right onto the gun, and then they're holding onto this pipe. Even though it's cold water, that's fine, you can do that. It's just not as ergonomic, it's kind of hard to hold on to, and I always wear gloves when I'm cleaning, so it's just not as easy. So tell me a little bit more about you know, this particular lance and what the differences are.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be one of our vented lances. This is made specifically for hot water. It is rated for 320 degrees. Not only is it for hot water, but it's just ergonomically, it's a lot more comfortable than like what you mentioned, just having a straight pipe or a pipe on there. So when you have this hooked into your gun, you can use the hot water. You don't have to worry about burning, burning your hand. And again, it's a lot more comfortable in your hand as you're using it.
So can you tell us, I'm sure people know this, but what about the vents? Like, what does that even mean that it's vented?
Absolutely. So essentially, it's very similar to the gun where you have the pipe running through it, and it has openings to cool it off. It's also going to be set in here, essentially kind of like a floating pipe. So it doesn't contact the plastic like a molded lance would. So it's open and it allows for air to get in there to cool that pipe, and before the heat gets to the lance or to the vented lance on your hand.
Yeah, and I mean, even in testing, we do plenty of testing here at 180 degrees, or even as low as 140. That's plenty hot. But in the commercial cleaning industry, I mean, they're cleaning at 140, 170, 180, 210, all the way into the steam category above 212. And so these lances, even the vented grip versions, are going to warm up. But imagine grabbing this pipe, even if you have gloves on, with 180 or 200 degrees. I mean, it gets hot. So that's why it's a safety concern, and that's where you run into the differences between vented, molded grip, and just a standard pipe. A lot of people think that you do have to use stainless fittings. I want to jump over to some of the differences between stainless and brass or plated steel. All of our fittings are going to be hot water rated, so you can use them in any scenario. But there are some that are going to last a lot longer in those hot water and corrosive environments. And typically when you're using hot water, it's not just hot water, you're using chemicals with it. And so you get into a scenario where you don't want to have downtime because that is costing you and your company money. And so if you were a power washer and you were cleaning a hog barn, which one of these fittings would you choose?
Stainless, 100%.
Okay, and what about the stainless? Can you tell us as far as the differences? There's some obvious stuff, but humor me.
Yeah, absolutely. So like he had mentioned, when you're typically running hot water, you may also be using it in conjunction with chemicals. So stainless steel is going to be a lot more chemically resistant against corrosion. So if you're going to be running hot water with or without a chemical, being anti-corrosive or more anti-corrosive with the stainless is definitely going to be the way to go.
The other piece of it is that when you're using hot water, you have expansion and contraction. Brass is really soft, and so brass expands and contracts a lot, which means they're opening pores and closing pores. Versus the stainless, which is not as hard as plated, and we've talked about that in the past, but this is going to close faster and it's not going to corrode as quickly. The other piece of it is that you can mix and match a lot of these. It's not uncommon for us to see like plated steel fittings on a hose, and then you also have stainless on your gun. If you're going to go with a material, it is best to stick with the same material throughout as close as you can. When you're looking at some of the plated steel properties, even though it's the hardest material, it's also the fastest to corrode. So whether it's zinc plated, galvanized, whatever, you are going to see the corrosion happen the quickest on those other materials versus the stainless. And just because it's stainless, just full disclosure, it doesn't mean it's not going to corrode eventually. You're still going to get corrosion from other fittings along the line. So for example, if you have plated steel fittings on the hose, or if there is a brass fitting down at the pump end of your hose, everything that's going through the line is touching everything else. And so within your fitting, there's actually only water touching about this much of the fitting. And so because of that, that portion is often going to be the first to corrode, but it's coming from up the line. And so the more stainless you can put in your sequence and in your system, the less likely it is that you're going to have some downtimes because of a failure. And last, we're going to touch on the foam cannon, because this is something that crosses both industries and types. However, it is officially only rated, and I say only, at 140 degrees. That is plenty hot, especially when you're foaming something. So warm water does foam better, but when we say warm water, we're talking like 110 degrees tops. Very rarely do you actually need this to be used at 140 degrees. So, I mean, how often you work with a ton of the contract cleaners and the distributors that are selling into the commercial market. Do those guys buy this?
They do, absolutely.
So what are some of the things that they might put through, or some of the applications where, how could you use this thing in that environment even though it's power washing? Yeah,
absolutely. Still use it in a power washing setting as long as the temperature is below 140 degrees. We see this a lot in the Midwest, used in hog barns, on farms, utilizing it to clean farm equipment. So it's not just for detailing your vehicle. It can definitely cross over into the power washing side of cleaning as long as it's under 140 degrees.
Finally, what we want to talk about is hose reels, because hose reels are going to be a very impactful accessory for any pressure washing system. And you've got a couple different options when it comes to hose reels. They're cold and they're hot, they're stainless, they're powder coated. There are really high-end ones and there are relatively low-end ones. And so we're going to show you a couple today that are at both ends of that spectrum. So here we have, these are both 100-foot hose reels. And you can see that mine over here is the powder coated version. So this is steel. We have previously had a hose on here. That's why you see the lines on here. So we wanted to mount it and test it, play with it. You've got a brass fitting right here. And so this particular hose reel is rated to 140 degrees. That's very similar, obviously. This is 140 degrees, but this is a commercial grade hose reel. It's just not gonna be something that you'd use with hot water. And in this case, you've also got a wet pipe. And so there are a couple versions out there. There's some with wet pipes and there are some with pigtails that come out. The second you start using warmer water on this, you get that expansion and contraction within the wet pipe, and that means that there's actual water pressure retained inside, and you very quickly can get corrosion on it. And that's why we really recommend, going to the pigtail version, or in this case, stainless. So tell me about the stainless. Why is that going to be better for an application versus this 4,000 PSI powder coated?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, this is full stainless. So this is rated for 215 degrees, but it's also, because it's stainless, like we were talking about in the fittings, it's also, if you're doing anything with chemical, it's going to be more chemically resistant than a powder coated.
Yeah, and so, when you're looking at some of the differences, when you're looking at the pressure washing setup you can get and the power washing setup you can get, there are obvious price differences when you start looking at this kind of product. It actually comes down to the swivel. And so in this case, if these things were 1 for 1, yeah, it's powder coated, it's not gonna last as long, it is probably gonna corrode sooner. But when you talk about what really makes this a lower PSI versus a higher PSI, or lower temp versus higher temp rating, it comes down to this one piece right here. And this is a high pressure swivel, and it is a live swivel, so it can move while it's under pressure. So this is brass, and this is what makes it your 4,000 PSI. There's different seals in here, it's obviously different material, versus your stainless. They're gonna be almost identical in size, and they can actually be swapped from one another, but because the seals in this are gonna be Viton, or in this case, FKM, and you have the material of stainless, this thing is gonna last a heck of a lot longer, and you're gonna be avoiding any of that corrosion problem that you would definitely be experiencing with this.
And like we talked about, downtime, that's the biggest thing, right? If these fail, so having the seals that are rated for the 5,000 PSI and the higher temp means that you're gonna have less downtime if you're running a full stainless setup when you're power washing.
Yeah, and when you talk about the packages that you can get between these two, it's endless when it comes to both ends of the spectrum. With regards to gray hose, blue hose, black hose, whatever you want to put on your reel, the different guns, different lances, you can spend as much or as little as you want. However, from my personal experience, because I've cleaned like most of you at home, I hate it when I go down because I can no longer be cleaning on the Saturday that I had actually dedicated time to do this. And so spending the money on the right materials to make it last for you, and not, being sure to winterize properly, all the normal things you do to maintain and care for your equipment, this stuff is gonna last so much longer, and it's gonna reduce downtime. That's the one thing that we hear all the time, is that I only used it once last spring and now I've got a leak, or my O-ring's shot. It's like, it's gonna happen. And so you wanna have the best materials you can so you don't run into those scenarios, because as soon as you're down, you're not cleaning and you're wasting time. So how do you know which package to choose when you're power washing or pressure washing? What does it come down to?
Really, it's just going to come down to the temperature that you're using. So for this side on the power washing, it's going to be warm water. So anything over 180 degrees is going to be considered hot water. That's when you're going to see the stainless and vented accessories. And on the pressure washing side, you're looking at standard pipes, you're looking at molded grip, you're looking at potentially lower PSI or lower GPM ratings, and definitely a lower temp rating. Just remember that everything from power washing can be used in pressure washing, but not everything in pressure washing can be used in power washing.